My name is Delilah Martinez, and I am 22 years old. 3 months ago, I discovered something that shattered everything I believed about family loyalty. My father threatened to cancel my medical school tuition unless I attended my golden sister's wedding with a smile plastered on my face. What he did not know was that I had already uncovered the truth about why he favored her so desperately. The wedding became my stage for the most calculated revenge I have ever executed, and the fallout destroyed our family in ways nobody saw coming. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama that literally changed everything, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. If you have ever dealt with family favoritism or felt like the black sheep, you are going to want to stick around for this one. Hit that like button if you are ready for some serious family justice, and do not forget to subscribe because trust me, you will want to hear how this revenge story unfolds. Growing up in the Martinez household meant living in the shadow of my sister Serafina. She was 3 years older, effortlessly beautiful, and could do absolutely no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I struggled through advanced placement classes and worked part-time jobs to save for college, Serafina glided through life with every advantage handed to her on a silver platter. Our father, a successful contractor, funded her art degree at an expensive private university while constantly reminding me that money was tight when I asked for help with anything. The favoritism was not subtle. Family photos featured Serafina prominently while I stood awkwardly to the side. Thanksgiving stories revolved around her latest artistic achievement or romantic conquest. When she announced her engagement to Marcus, a wealthy investment banker she had been dating for barely 8 months, our parents acted like she had won the lottery. The wedding budget they allocated could have paid for 2 years of my medical school tuition, but when I mentioned needing help with my upcoming semester payment, Dad just shrugged and said I should have chosen a less expensive career path like Serafina. Everything changed on a random Tuesday evening in September. I had come home early from my clinical rotation to grab some textbooks when I overheard Dad talking on the phone in his study. His voice carried that particular tone he used when discussing serious business matters, so I paused outside the door, not really intending to eavesdrop but unable to walk away. The payments need to continue exactly as they have been for the past 23 years, he said firmly. Serafina can never know the truth about her biological father. The wedding is the perfect opportunity to cement our family image publicly. My blood ran cold. Biological father? I pressed closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Look, I know the monthly amount seems excessive, but Robert has been generous about keeping quiet. If he decides to show up at the wedding or contact Serafina directly, everything falls apart. My wife would leave me, and Serafina would hate me forever for lying to her. Robert. I had never heard that name before, but the implications were staggering. Dad continued talking, and each word felt like a physical blow. The college fund I set up for Serafina was actually Robert's money. He wanted to provide for his daughter even though he agreed to stay out of her life. Every advantage she has had, every opportunity, was paid for by her real father while I took the credit. I stumbled backward from the door, my mind reeling. 23 years of payments. College fund from her biological father. Serafina was not Dad's biological daughter, but he had showered her with love and resources while treating me, his actual child, like an inconvenience. The cruelty was breathtaking. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I searched through old documents when my parents were out, looking for any trace of this Robert person or evidence of the payments Dad had mentioned. Hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, behind folders of tax documents, I found a manila envelope labeled personal, private. Inside were bank statements showing monthly transfers of $3,000 to our household account, all coming from Robert Harrison. There were also photocopies of a legal agreement dated 24 years ago, before Serafina's birth. The document outlined child support payments and a college fund in exchange for Robert relinquishing all parental rights and agreeing to have no contact with the child. But the most damning piece of evidence was a series of handwritten letters from Robert to Dad, expressing his regret about the arrangement and his desire to know his daughter. In one particularly heartbreaking letter dated just 2 years ago, Robert wrote about watching Serafina's art exhibitions from afar and feeling proud of the woman she had become. He mentioned wanting to attend her wedding but understanding that his presence would complicate everything. The final letter in the stack was recent, dated just 3 weeks before my discovery. Robert had written that he was tired of hiding and considering whether to reach out to Serafina directly. Dad had apparently convinced him to wait until after the wedding, promising to consider telling Serafina the truth afterward. Reading those letters, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at Dad for his hypocrisy and favoritism. Sadness for Robert, who had been denied a relationship with his daughter for over 2 decades. And a burning desire for justice that surprised me with its intensity. The wedding planning continued around me like an elaborate performance. Dad spared no expense for his princess, booking the most exclusive venue in town and hiring the best photographers and caterers. Meanwhile, he had given me an ultimatum about attending: show up with enthusiasm and play the role of the supportive sister, or he would withdraw his minimal financial support for my final year of medical school. Family appearances matter, Delilah, he had said coldly when I questioned why my attendance was so important to him. Serafina's wedding day needs to be perfect, and that means having her whole family there celebrating. The irony was not lost on me. He was so concerned about family appearances while actively covering up the fact that Serafina was not even his biological daughter. Every time I watched him fuss over wedding details or beam with pride while discussing his daughter's future, I felt sick to my stomach. I started researching Robert Harrison online, and what I found made this situation even more complex. He was a successful architect who had never married and had no other children. His social media profiles showed a lonely man who traveled extensively, probably trying to fill the void left by the daughter he could never acknowledge. He lived less than 50 miles away from us, close enough to have been part of Serafina's life if circumstances had been different. The more I learned, the more I realized that Dad had not just betrayed me with his favoritism, he had betrayed everyone. He had stolen credit for providing for Serafina while letting her real father live with the pain of separation. He had let me struggle financially while spending Robert's money on my sister. And he had built our entire family dynamic on a foundation of lies. As the wedding approached, everyone around me was caught up in the excitement and preparations. But I was planning something entirely different. The wedding would indeed be perfect, just not in the way Dad expected. It was time for the truth to come out, and I was going to make sure it happened in the most public and memorable way possible. The revelation about Serafina's parentage shifted something fundamental inside me. For days after discovering those documents, I walked around in a daze, trying to process the magnitude of Dad's deception. But as the shock wore off, it was replaced by something much more dangerous: cold, calculating anger. I realized I had been playing by the wrong rules my entire life. While I had worked myself to exhaustion trying to earn Dad's approval and respect, Serafina had been living off the generosity of a man she did not even know existed. Every scholarship I had fought for, every loan I had taken, every night I had stayed up studying while working multiple jobs. All of it was unnecessary suffering while Dad funneled Robert's money to his real daughter. The wedding was 6 weeks away, and I needed a plan. Simply confronting Dad privately would accomplish nothing except giving him time to spin the story or find ways to silence me. Telling Serafina directly felt cruel. She was genuinely innocent in all of this and was about to marry the man she loved. But doing nothing meant watching this charade continue indefinitely while Dad maintained his position as the beloved patriarch who had sacrificed so much for his family. I started by reaching out to Robert Harrison. Finding his contact information was easier than I had expected, since his architectural firm had a public website with his direct email. Crafting that first message took me hours. How do you introduce yourself to someone as the daughter of the man who has been keeping him from his own child for over 2 decades? Dear Mr. Harrison, I finally wrote, my name is Delilah Martinez, and I believe you know my father, Eduardo Martinez. I recently discovered some documents that suggest you are my sister Serafina's biological father. I think it is time you two met, and I would like to help make that happen." His response came within 12 hours, and the raw emotion in his words made me cry. Robert had been waiting for over 20 years for any contact from Serafina's family. He was grateful, desperate, and terrified all at once. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere we would not accidentally encounter anyone from our social circle. Meeting Robert was like looking at Serafina's future. He had the same artistic sensibility, the same expressive hands, and the same laugh that I had always envied in my sister. But where Serafina was confident and carefree, Robert carried the weight of 2 decades of regret and lost time. "I never wanted to give up my rights," he told me, stirring his coffee with shaking hands. "But your father convinced me it was best for everyone. He said your mother would never accept another man's child, and that Serafina would have a better life if she grew up believing Eduardo was her biological father." I was young and scared, and I let him manipulate me into walking away. Robert had been sending money faithfully every month, not because of any legal obligation but because he wanted to provide for his daughter in the only way he was allowed. He had attended every public art exhibition Serafina had participated in, always staying in the back and leaving before anyone might recognize him. He had a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings of her achievements and photos taken from a distance at various events. "I have been waiting for the right moment to reach out," he admitted. "But your father keeps convincing me to wait just a little longer." First it was until she graduated high school, then college, then until she found a stable relationship. Now he is saying I should wait until after the wedding. I am starting to think he never intends to tell her the truth. That was when I laid out my proposal. The wedding was going to happen regardless, but it did not have to be the celebration of lies that Dad was orchestrating. Instead, it could be the moment when our family finally faced the truth. Robert could attend as an invited guest, and during the reception, when everyone was gathered together, the real story could come out. "I am not suggesting we ruin Serafina's day," I clarified quickly when I saw the panic in Robert's eyes. "But this might be our only chance to force Dad to be honest. If we do this right, it can actually be a positive thing. Serafina gains a father who has loved her from afar for 23 years, and Dad has to face the consequences of his deception." Robert was hesitant at first. He had been conditioned to avoid any action that might upset the delicate balance Dad had maintained for so long. But as we talked more, his resolve strengthened. He was tired of hiding, tired of watching his daughter's life from the shadows, and tired of letting Eduardo take credit for his sacrifices. We spent the next several weeks planning every detail. Robert would need an invitation to the wedding, which meant I had to forge one using the design template Mom had shown me weeks earlier. I created a backstory for him. He was a family friend from Dad's construction business, someone who had helped with a major project years ago and maintained a friendship with our family ever since. The story was plausible enough that Mom would not question it if she happened to see his name on the guest list. More importantly, I needed to gather additional evidence beyond the documents I had already found. Robert provided bank statements from his end, showing 23 years of monthly transfers. He also had copies of the original legal agreement and several letters Dad had written over the years, promising to tell Serafina the truth when the time was right. I started recording conversations with Dad whenever he made comments about Serafina or complained about my expenses. His hypocrisy was stunning once I started paying attention. In the same breath, he would talk about how proud he was of his daughter's achievements while grumbling about having to help with my medical school costs. The most damning recording came during a family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding. Dad was going on about how much the wedding was costing and how it was worth every penny because blood is thicker than water and family comes first. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. As the wedding date approached, I found myself oddly calm. The nervous energy that had consumed me for weeks was replaced by a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. This was not just about revenge, although I would be lying if I said that was not part of it. This was about justice, truth, and giving Robert the chance to know his daughter while she was still young enough to build a real relationship with him. Serafina was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her special day. She was caught up in the final details of flowers and seating arrangements, completely trusting that Dad had everything under control. In a way, that innocence made what I was planning both harder and more necessary. The night before the wedding, I sat in my room reviewing every piece of evidence, every element of the plan, every possible scenario for how things might unfold. Tomorrow would change our family forever, and there would be no going back. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in deception and careful manipulation. I had become someone I barely recognized, calculating, secretive, and completely focused on my endgame. Every smile I gave Dad, every enthusiastic comment about the wedding preparations, every moment I played the role of the supportive sister was a performance designed to keep him comfortable and unsuspecting. My biggest challenge was managing Mom's involvement without revealing my true intentions. Elena Martinez was not a bad person, but she had been complicit in Dad's favoritism for decades. She genuinely believed that Eduardo was Serafina's biological father, which made her easier to manipulate but also meant she would be devastated when the truth came out. I felt guilty about the collateral damage my plan would cause, but I reminded myself that she had chosen to ignore my struggles while celebrating Serafina's every achievement. The guest list management was trickier than I had anticipated. Robert's invitation needed to look legitimate, which meant creating a paper trail that would hold up under casual scrutiny. I had researched Dad's construction business extensively and created a fictional project from 8 years ago that Robert had supposedly consulted on. I even went so far as to create fake email exchanges between them discussing the renovation of the Westfield commercial complex. A real project Dad had worked on that I could reference convincingly if anyone asked questions. 3 days before the wedding, I received a call from Marcus, Serafina's fiancé. He was having last-minute anxiety about some of the guest arrangements and wanted to review the seating chart with me. This was perfect timing for phase 2 of my plan. Actually, Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something important, I said carefully. There might be some family drama at the wedding that you should be prepared for. Marcus had always been kind to me, treating me with more respect than my own father often did. He was genuinely concerned about Serafina's happiness, which made him a potential ally if I approached this correctly. What kind of drama? He asked, and I could hear the tension in his voice. Nothing that will ruin the day, I assured him quickly. But there might be some revelations about our family history that come out during the reception. I cannot give you all the details right now, but I want you to be ready to support Serafina emotionally. She is going to need you. Marcus pressed for more information, but I held firm. I needed him aware enough to be helpful but not informed enough to interfere with my plan. The conversation ended with his promise to stay close to Serafina during the reception and to help her handle whatever might arise. Robert and I had been meeting twice a week to refine our strategy. He had grown more confident as the date approached, fueled by decades of suppressed longing to acknowledge his daughter publicly. But he was also terrified of traumatizing Serafina or creating a scene that would overshadow what should be the happiest day of her life. What if she hates me for disrupting her wedding? He asked during our final planning session. What if she blames me for the deception instead of understanding that I was trying to respect what I thought was best for her? Robert, you have been the one person in this entire situation who has acted with integrity, I told him firmly. You honored your agreement even when it broke your heart. You provided for her without taking credit. You stayed away when you desperately wanted to be involved. If anyone comes out of this looking good, it will be you. We had decided that the revelation would happen during the traditional father-daughter dance. Dad would be on the dance floor with Serafina, basking in the moment and the attention, when I would approach the microphone. The timing was crucial. Late enough in the reception that people would be relaxed and emotional, but not so late that anyone would be too intoxicated to process what was happening. The script I had written was careful and compassionate. I would start by talking about the importance of family and truth, then gradually reveal that there was something important our family needed to share with everyone. Robert would stand up from his table, and I would invite him to come forward. Only then would I explain his true relationship to Serafina. The goal is not to humiliate Dad publicly, I explained to Robert for the 10th time. The goal is to give Serafina the truth she deserves and to ensure that Dad cannot continue living this lie. If he looks bad in the process, that is a consequence of his own choices, not something we are deliberately trying to cause. 2 days before the wedding, I had lunch with my cousin Maria, who had always been closer to me than to Serafina despite the age difference. Maria was sharp and observant, and she had noticed the family dynamics that others chose to ignore. When I told her there might be some surprises at the wedding, she was immediately intrigued. "Delilah, you have that look you get when you are planning something big," she said with a knowing smile. "What are you up to?" I could not tell her everything, but I gave her enough information to secure her support. Maria had always resented the way Dad treated me compared to Serafina, and when I hinted that there were secrets about our family structure that were about to come to light, she was more than ready to help however she could. "Just promise me you will sit near the front during the reception," I told her. "And if things get emotional or chaotic, help keep everyone calm and focused on the fact that this is ultimately about love and truth, not about hurting anyone." Maria agreed immediately, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders knowing I would have at least one family member on my side when everything went down. The day before the wedding, Dad pulled me aside for what I assumed would be a final lecture about my behavior and attitude. Instead, he surprised me with something resembling an apology. "Delilah, I know I have been hard on you over the years," he said awkwardly. "I just want you to understand that providing for this family has not been easy, and sometimes I have had to make difficult choices about where to allocate our resources." The conversation was surreal. Here was Dad, trying to justify decades of favoritism and neglect, apparently feeling guilty enough to address it but still too proud to admit the full extent of what he had done. I listened to his half-hearted explanations about wanting me to be independent and self-sufficient while making sure Serafina had every opportunity to flourish. "I hope that after tomorrow, we can start fresh as a family," he concluded. "Maybe once Serafina is settled in her new life, I can do more to help with your remaining school expenses." The timing of this conversation was almost too perfect. Dad was feeling sentimental and paternal, completely unaware that in 24 hours his entire world would come crashing down around him. I managed to thank him graciously while internally marveling at his ability to maintain this fiction even to himself. That evening, I called Robert for our final conversation before the wedding. He was nervous but determined, and we went over the plan one last time. He would arrive at the venue during the cocktail hour, introduce himself to a few people using our prepared backstory, and then stay relatively quiet until the moment arrived. I would signal him by nodding in his direction before approaching the microphone. "Remember, this is about Serafina," I reminded him. "No matter how angry you might feel toward Dad when you see him playing the proud father role, keep your focus on the daughter you are finally going to meet." As I hung up the phone and prepared for bed, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and sadness. Tomorrow would bring justice and truth, but it would also destroy the family structure I had known my entire life. There would be no going back to the way things were, no pretending that everything was normal once the secrets were exposed. But as I thought about Robert sitting alone in his apartment, looking at photos of the daughter he had never been allowed to acknowledge, and about Serafina building her life without knowing that her real father was less than 50 miles away, I knew I was doing the right thing. The performance was almost over, and tomorrow the real story would finally begin. The wedding day dawned perfect and cloudless, as if the universe was mocking the chaos I was about to unleash. Serafina looked radiant in her designer gown, completely oblivious to the fact that this would be the last day she lived believing Eduardo Martinez was her biological father. Dad strutted around the venue like a peacock, accepting congratulations on his beautiful daughter and basking in the attention that came with hosting the social event of the season. I had barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my mind. What if Robert lost his nerve? What if Dad somehow discovered the plan? What if Serafina had a complete breakdown? But as I watched Dad pose for photos with his arm around Serafina, his chest puffed out with pride for achievements he had never actually supported, my resolve crystallized into something unbreakable. The ceremony itself was beautiful and went off without a hitch. Serafina and Marcus exchanged vows that brought tears to everyone's eyes, and even I found myself genuinely moved by their obvious love for each other. For a moment, I questioned whether I was making a mistake by planning to disrupt what should be pure celebration. But then I saw Robert sitting in the back row, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter marry the love of her life from a distance, and I remembered why this had to happen. During the cocktail hour, I watched Robert work the room exactly as we had planned. He introduced himself as a business associate of Dad's, made small talk about the beautiful venue and the lovely ceremony, and gradually positioned himself at a table near the front of the reception area. Dad was too busy playing host to pay attention to individual guests, and Mom was too focused on ensuring every detail was perfect. The reception began with all the traditional elements. The grand entrance, the first dance between bride and groom, the dinner service. I gave the maid of honor speech I had prepared, keeping it light and affectionate while privately counting down the minutes until my real moment arrived. Serafina glowed with happiness throughout the evening, completely trusting that her family would continue to celebrate and support her just as they always had. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere became more relaxed and emotional. People were sharing stories and toasting the happy couple, and the open bar had loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions. It was the perfect environment for what I was about to do, intimate enough that everyone would pay attention, but festive enough that people would initially assume whatever I said would be positive. When the DJ announced the traditional father-daughter dance, my heart rate spiked to dangerous levels. Dad stood up and offered his arm to Serafina with theatrical gallantry, and she laughed as they made their way to the center of the dance floor. The song was My Girl by the Temptations, which Dad had chosen because he used to sing it to Serafina when she was little. The irony was almost unbearable. I watched them dance for about 30 seconds, allowing the sentimental moment to build and the crowd to focus their attention on the touching scene. Dad was beaming with pride and joy, probably thinking about how perfect this day had been and how successfully he had maintained his image as the devoted father. Serafina was radiant, completely secure in the love and support of her family. Then I stood up and walked deliberately toward the microphone the DJ had been using for announcements. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I am sorry to interrupt this beautiful moment, but there is something important our family needs to share with all of you tonight." The music stopped abruptly, and every head in the room turned toward me. Dad and Serafina froze on the dance floor, confusion evident on both their faces. I could see Dad starting to panic, probably assuming I was about to make some embarrassing toast or air grievances about the family dynamics. "Family is about more than blood," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It is about love, sacrifice, and being there for each other through everything life brings. Tonight, we are celebrating not just Serafina and Marcus, but the power of family bonds that transcend traditional definitions." I paused and made eye contact with Robert, giving him the subtle nod we had practiced. He stood up slowly, his face pale but determined. Several people at nearby tables glanced at him curiously, probably wondering why this relatively unknown guest was standing during what appeared to be an impromptu speech. "There is someone here tonight who has been a part of our family for over 20 years, even though most of you have never met him," I said, gesturing toward Robert. "Someone who has loved Serafina from the moment she was born, who has supported her dreams and celebrated her achievements, who has made tremendous sacrifices to ensure she had every opportunity to succeed." Dad's face had gone completely white, and I could see him trying to process what was happening. Serafina looked bewildered, glancing between me, Robert, and Dad as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Robert Harrison is not just a family friend," I announced, my voice growing stronger with each word. "He is Serafina's biological father, and tonight, after 23 years of staying in the background, he is finally able to acknowledge the daughter he has loved from afar. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear someone gasp, probably Mom, and could see guests turning to whisper to each other in confusion and shock. But my eyes were focused on Serafina, whose expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and dawning understanding. Robert began walking slowly toward the dance floor, his hands shaking but his steps steady. "Serafina," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I have been waiting 23 years to tell you how proud I am to be your father." Dad finally found his voice, but instead of the angry denial I had expected, what came out was a broken whisper. "How did you find out?" "I found the documents," I said simply. "The bank statements, the letters, the original agreement. 23 years of payments, 23 years of lies, 23 years of letting you take credit for another man's love and sacrifice." Serafina stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, still wearing her wedding dress, trying to process the fact that her entire understanding of her family had just been shattered. Marcus had moved quickly to her side and was holding her steady, just as I had hoped he would. "I do not understand," she said finally, her voice barely audible through the microphone feedback. "What payments? What lies?" That was when Robert stepped forward, and with 23 years of suppressed emotion pouring out of him, he told his daughter the truth about how much he loved her and how sorry he was for staying away so long. The moments immediately following my revelation felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Every face in the reception hall reflected a different stage of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. The elegant wedding celebration had instantly transformed into the most dramatic family confrontation any of these guests had ever witnessed. Serafina staggered backward, her hand flying to her chest as if she could not breathe. Marcus caught her arm and guided her to a nearby chair, his face a mixture of protective anger and bewildered concern. The designer wedding dress that had looked so perfect moments before suddenly seemed like a costume, as if my sister was playing a role in someone else's story. "This is not happening," she whispered, but her voice carried through the microphone feedback from when she had been dancing near the sound equipment. "This cannot be real." Dad finally found his footing and tried to take control of the situation, but his usual commanding presence had evaporated. "Everyone, please, there has been a misunderstanding," he said loudly, moving toward the microphone. "Delilah is confused about some old business documents. This is neither the time nor the place for family discussions." But Robert was not backing down after 23 years of silence. "Eduardo, stop lying," he said with quiet dignity that somehow carried more weight than shouting would have. "Serafina deserves to know the truth, and these people deserve to understand why they are witnessing this moment." Mom had risen from the head table and was making her way toward us, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly I could barely track them. Confusion, betrayal, anger, and something that looked like relief all flashed across her features as the implications of what she was hearing began to sink in. "Elena, you knew," Robert said gently as she approached. "Deep down, you always knew something was not right about the timeline, about how suddenly Eduardo could afford things after Serafina was born, about why he was so insistent that we never talk about the early days of your relationship." "I suspected," Mom admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I chose to believe the story Eduardo told me because it was easier than facing the alternative." The wedding guests were riveted, some recording the drama on their phones despite the intimate nature of what was unfolding. This was no longer just a family revelation, it was a public spectacle that would be talked about in our community for years to come. Maria, my cousin, had positioned herself near Serafina and was providing quiet support, just as I had hoped she would. She caught my eye and nodded slightly, letting me know she understood the broader context even without knowing all the details. "Serafina," Robert continued, his voice growing steadier as he spoke directly to his daughter for the first time in her adult life, "I need you to know that staying away from you was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every month when I sent the money for your expenses, I included a letter that your father promised to save for you. I have been to every art show, every graduation, every public event where I could see you from a distance. You were there? Serafina asked, her voice breaking. You were watching me? Always, Robert confirmed. I have a photo album at home with pictures from every important moment of your life. I know about your first gallery showing when you were 16, about the scholarship you won for summer art camp, about the time you won the state competition for young artists. I have been so proud of you, and I have wanted nothing more than to tell you that. Dad was watching this exchange with growing desperation, realizing that his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling beyond repair. Robert, you agreed to stay away, he said frantically. We had a legal agreement. You cannot just show up after 23 years and destroy our family. Your family? I interjected, my own anger finally breaking through the careful control I had maintained all evening. Dad, you destroyed our family years ago when you decided to build it on lies and favoritism. You took credit for Robert's sacrifices while treating me like a burden because I was actually your biological child. The guests were beginning to understand the broader implications of what they were witnessing. This was not just about paternity, it was about decades of deception, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse disguised as family loyalty. Marcus had been listening intently while supporting his new wife, and suddenly he stood up with an expression of dawning realization. The college fund, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Eduardo, you told me you had sacrificed everything to pay for Serafina's education, but you have been taking credit for money that was never yours. And letting Delilah struggle financially while you played the generous father, added Maria, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I have watched you treat your own daughter like a second-class citizen while celebrating every breath Serafina took. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of this real-time family implosion. Some guests looked uncomfortable, probably wishing they could leave but unable to tear themselves away from the drama. Others seemed genuinely invested in seeing justice served, particularly those who had witnessed Dad's treatment of me over the years. Serafina finally stood up, her wedding dress rustling as she moved toward Robert. Her makeup was streaked with tears, but her expression had shifted from shock to something resembling curiosity. Show me, she said quietly. If you have been watching me all these years, if you have photos and letters, I want to see them. They are in my car, Robert said immediately. I brought them tonight because I hoped that maybe after the wedding, there might be a chance to give them to you. As Robert left to retrieve the evidence of his decades-long devotion, Dad made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. This is insane, he announced to the room. You are all witnessing a jealous daughter destroy her sister's wedding because she could not stand to see Serafina happy. But the guests were not buying it anymore. Too many people had witnessed the family dynamics over the years, too many had seen Dad's favoritism and my struggles. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place for everyone who had ever wondered about the discrepancies in how he treated his two daughters. When Robert returned with a thick photo album and a box of letters, Serafina sat down at the head table and began looking through 23 years of documentation. With each page she turned, with each letter she read, her understanding of her life story was being completely rewritten. The wedding reception had officially ended, but no one was leaving. This was now something much more significant than a celebration, it was a reckoning that had been decades in the making. In the weeks that followed the wedding, our family structure collapsed and rebuilt itself in ways none of us could have predicted. The immediate aftermath was chaotic and painful, but as the dust settled, something healthier and more honest began to emerge from the wreckage of Dad's deception. Serafina spent the first 3 days after her wedding at Robert's house, poring over the letters he had written but never sent, looking through photo albums documenting a love that had spanned her entire life without her knowledge. Marcus was incredibly supportive throughout this process, helping his new wife navigate the emotional whiplash of discovering that her entire understanding of her family was built on lies. I keep thinking about all the times I felt guilty for having advantages you did not, Serafina told me during our first real conversation after the revelation. Dad always made it seem like he was making sacrifices to give me opportunities, and I felt terrible that you had to work so hard for everything. Now I understand that he was spending another man's money while taking credit for generosity that was never his. The relationship between Serafina and Robert developed quickly once the barriers were removed. She discovered that her artistic talents came directly from him. He was an accomplished architect with a side passion for sculpture and painting. They spent hours talking about creative processes and artistic vision, conversations that Dad had never been equipped to have with her despite taking credit for nurturing her talents. Dad's response to the exposure was initially denial, then anger, then desperate attempts at justification. He hired a lawyer to explore whether Robert or I had violated any laws by exposing the arrangement, but the attorney quickly explained that all we had done was tell the truth about a situation Dad had created himself. Mom filed for divorce 3 weeks after the wedding. The betrayal of the secret payments was devastating enough, but learning about the extent of Dad's favoritism toward a child who was not even biologically his while neglecting his actual daughter was the final straw. She had suspected something was not right for years but had chosen willful ignorance over confronting difficult truths. I enabled this by not asking harder questions, she admitted to me during one of our lengthy conversations as she sorted through 2 decades of marriage. I saw how differently he treated you and Serafina, and I told myself it was just personality differences or birth order dynamics. I should have protected you better. The most surprising development was how the extended family and community responded to the revelation. Rather than being scandalized by the public nature of the confrontation, most people expressed relief that the truth had finally come out. Too many family members and friends had witnessed the favoritism and wondered about the financial discrepancies to be shocked by the explanation. My relationship with Dad deteriorated completely. Once his lies were exposed, he seemed incapable of taking responsibility for the pain he had caused. Instead, he alternated between blaming me for destroying the family and insisting that his deception had been necessary to protect everyone involved. We have not spoken since the divorce proceedings began. The vindication I felt was profound but complicated. For 22 years, I had internalized Dad's treatment of me as somehow deserved, assuming I was less worthy of love and support than my sister. Learning that his favoritism was based on guilt and lies rather than any deficiency in me was liberating, but it also highlighted how much damage had been done to my self-worth over the decades. Robert became an unexpected source of support as I processed these emotions. He understood guilt and regret in ways that few people could, having spent 23 years second-guessing his decision to honor the agreement with Dad. We developed a friendship based on shared experiences of loss and the complicated emotions that come with loving someone you are not allowed to acknowledge. Serafina struggled initially with anger toward Dad, but she channeled those feelings into strengthening her relationships with the people who had been honest with her. She and Marcus postponed their honeymoon to focus on family healing, and she made a point of being more present in my life than she had ever been before. I realized I never really knew you, she told me 6 months after the wedding. Dad kept us focused on our different paths instead of encouraging us to support each other. I want to change that. We started having weekly dinners where we talked about our experiences growing up in the same household but living completely different realities. Serafina was horrified to learn about the extent of my financial struggles and immediately offered to help with my remaining medical school expenses. I declined her money but accepted her emotional support, which turned out to be more valuable than any financial assistance. The legal ramifications were minimal since Robert had been providing support voluntarily rather than under court order. However, Dad was required to pay back spousal support and property division costs related to the assets he had acquired using Robert's money during his marriage to Mom. My medical school graduation became a celebration of chosen family rather than biological obligation. Robert attended alongside Mom, Serafina, Marcus, and several cousins and friends who had supported me throughout the years. Dad was not invited, and his absence felt like freedom rather than loss. As I reflect on the entire experience now, I realize that exposing Dad's deception was not just about getting revenge for years of unfair treatment. It was about creating space for authentic relationships based on truth rather than maintaining comfortable lies. Robert got to know his daughter during the most important transition of her young adult life. Serafina gained a father who genuinely appreciated her talents and understood her creative drive. Mom escaped a marriage built on fundamental dishonesty. And I learned that my worth was never dependent on earning Dad's approval. The wedding video, which captured the entire confrontation, has become somewhat legendary in our social circle. Instead of being embarrassed by the public nature of the revelation, our family has embraced the idea that truth-telling, even when it is messy and uncomfortable, is preferable to maintaining beautiful lies. Sometimes people ask if I regret choosing such a dramatic moment to expose Dad's secrets. But I have come to understand that there was no gentle way to dismantle 2 decades of deception. The truth was going to be painful regardless of how it came out, and choosing a moment when the entire family was gathered together ensured that everyone heard the same story at the same time. The experience taught me that justice does not always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like liberation, like finally being able to build relationships on solid ground instead of shifting sand. Dad lost his family because of his own choices, but the rest of us gained something more valuable than what we had before: the freedom to love each other without pretense or hidden agendas. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and standing up for what is right? Maybe you have witnessed favoritism that seemed unfair, or discovered family secrets that changed everything you thought you knew about your relationships. Drop a comment and share your experience. Sometimes the most healing thing is knowing we are not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and family justice stories. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the truth really does set you free, even when it hurts. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is not determined by how others choose to treat you. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we were born into, and there is incredible strength in building relationships based on honesty rather than obligation.